Welcome to the Solid Verbal. The Solid Verbal.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
I've heard so many players say, well, I want to be happy. You want to be happy for a day? Eat a steak.
It's that woo-woo!
And now, Dan and Ty.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. Ty Hildenbrand here. Dan Rubenstein. Dan Rubenstein not over there this evening. Dan Rubenstein still out in Arizona covering the Super Bowl for his website, SB Nation. He will be back with us next Wednesday when we review all things National Signing Day. This evening, though, we're going to have a primer. For all y'all who follow recruiting about as closely as I do, we're going to bring on our friend Brandon Huffman. He is the National Director of Recruiting for Scout.com. He's going to help give us a primer so we know what to watch for, what to look for, what to pay attention to as this thing ramps up over the next week or so. If you're interested, don't forget you can check him out over on Scout.com. He'll be with us momentarily. Mama H, though, has been kind enough to join me in the studio this evening, just if only to serve as someone to talk to when I'm doing the solo show this evening. And we actually had a bunch of questions come through for you, if you're game to answer them a little bit later.
I'm game, and I say hello out there to all you loyal verballers.
You collected the Verbies this year, did you not?
I did.
If you're interested in voting for the Verbies, you can head on out to solidverbal.com/Verbies. We've got a bunch of polls there if you're interested. solidverbal.com/Verbies. That voting is now open. Dan and I will figure out when exactly we're going to present our imaginary awards. Probably going to do that at some point in late February. We'll figure that out. We'll let everybody know. In the meantime, though, you can check us out on all the social media outlets at Facebook, at FanCred, at Twitter. Our show this evening is brought to you in part by our good friends over at Bombas.com, Mama H.
Love the Bombas.
Yeah? You bought these as Christmas presents, actually.
I did. And everyone loved them. They're neat looking. They're, from what everyone tells me.
Do you have a pair for yourself yet?
You know what? That amazes me. I was thinking about that. Everybody got Bombas but me.
Why don't you buy a pair for yourself?
I think I will.
You can get the free pair now if you go to bombas.com/verbal. It's bombas.com/verbal. You can either get a free pair or you can get 20% off your order. It depends how large of an order you have. You can figure out what makes the most sense for you. As you stated, Mama H, they are very comfortable socks. They've got this whole thing going on where they don't fall down.
Do they stay up for sure?
They do.
Like that? Do
they do. I wear them to work, actually.
No kidding.
Because as I've said time and time again, the greatest secret in corporate America is the old black Nike socks trick.
Yeah.
You don't always need to go with the dress socks. You can go a good pair of black Nike athletic socks.
As long as you don't find somebody wearing those really short pants.
The short pants aren't good.
When they sit down,
But I've been going with Bombas now.
Really?
Because they're comfortable. They stay up. And when your feet sweat, this is getting disgusting. They sort of wick the moisture away from your foot. They've got soft cotton. They've also got the honeycomb build in the arch of your foot.
Ty, my birthday's coming up soon.
If I got you socks for your birthday, you'd shoot me.
No, I wouldn't.
You want these? I'll get them.
Maybe not. I wouldn't mind having a pair or two. Yeah,
Bombas has
they
also
make mini feet.
No, they probably don't make them small enough for you.
I know, kids.
Bombas has donated more than 300,000 pairs of socks to those in need since launching in 2013. So if you buy a pair of socks, you are helping give back to a pretty good cause. One more time, it's bombas.com/verbal, bombas.com/verbal. They're comfy, they fit well, they don't slip, and they just last. Go to bombas.com/verbal right now for either a free pair or 20% off your order. Mama H, it's good to have you on the show.
It's good to be back, my dear.
It's been a while. What were your thoughts on Notre Dame football this year?
Oh, Ty, here we go. I just thought Notre Dame was going to do so much better. Some of those losses, they were just horrible. And, Everett Golson, he was just so much talent. And I still think he has all that talent. But all that fumbling, my God, I actually feel sorry for the guy. I still would go with him, to be perfectly honest.
You still go with him over Zaire?
I would, yeah.
You didn't like Zaire when you saw him.
No, it's not that I didn't like him. I'm a little hesitant because he can run like Dickens, but so can Everett Golson. But his passing game just left something to be desired, I think.
Notre Dame's a basketball school now anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
I just watched them beat Duke last night, and it was incredible. I had to go do my inhaler 3 times.
Was Dickie V doing that game?
You know what? He was doing it, but I said to Uncle Joey, he was so subdued. And I think it's because most of his kids and his son-in-law, they all graduated from Notre Dame. So Notre Dame and Duke, he wasn't like going crazy with the Dukies. You know what I mean?
They can't resist putting Dickie V on a game like that.
He was actually, he wasn't bad. I said to Uncle Joe, I was surprised that I could actually listen to the game with him on. Uncle Joey called me. He was blowing into a paper bag. And he was like, oh my God. He said, I can't catch my breath. I said, I know, the game was just fabulous.
Okay, joining me now, it's our old friend from Scout.com to talk all things National Signing Day and hopefully give us a primer for what lies ahead over the next week. It's Brandon Huffman back with us here on the Solid Verbal. Brandon, how are you?
Oh, Ty, I'm doing great. I am very excited for 1 week from today, which is after National Signing Day, and just getting this class to bed and moving on to the next class.
We actually got a question to that point from Kevin on Facebook, who wanted to know what's better for you, the day after signing day or the day after the opening?
Oh, it's no question. It's the day after signing day. Because the opening, I live about 3 hours north of Portland. It's summer. I get to come home to my kids. It's great. But my family will go down to the opening with me. Signing day, I don't even remember what they look like because it usually is right after Christmas. I leave for a week for the All-American games, and then it's the stretch run, and then my kids come in, and I'm like, who are you people? And then finally, the day after signing day, I look at them like, oh, yes, I remember you guys. So I am very happy the day after signing day every year because a lot of these kids you've been covering 2 or 3 years. You're ready to move on to the next group, but more importantly, you're ready to go back to sleep at normal hours again.
So with that being said, which player in the field is most likely to pull a Terrell Pryor and drag the whole process out beyond signing day?
You know, if I had to make a prediction, I would say it's either going to be Martez Ivey or Iman Marshall. And I can absolutely see it being Iman Marshall. I know he's planning to announce on signing day on ESPN, but the way his recruitment's gone, even though it's pretty much a foregone conclusion he's going to USC, I could see him dragging it out a couple of days. I remember, Terrell Pryor, I think, was in March, or he might have been in April. Bryce Brown went March. Jadeveon Clowney did, Valentine's Day. And then we hit a stretch where a couple of the top guys just decided, hey, let's get it out of the way. And right now, I would say that Ivy or Marshall would probably be the 2 leaders in the clubhouse to drag it out a little bit more.
What are the storylines that you're following? Who are the guys that have yet to announce? Where is the intrigue with what we're going to see happen next Wednesday?
Well, if you're a Florida fan, it's been a rough couple of years for you, but with Jim McElwain coming in and finally some stability, there's no longer the question about Will Muschamp, is he going to stay or is he going to be let go? Now it's a matter of moving forward with McElwain, and there's a chance that Florida could close with 3 guys ranked in the top 15. They could still end up getting Martez Ivey, they could get Byron Cowart, and they could end up getting C.C. Jefferson. And those 3 guys are all top 15 players nationally, all All-Americans. And Florida had, I think, Cowart was on campus last week, Ivey and Jefferson visit this week, and there's a chance that they could still close with those 3. Considering where their recruiting was about a month ago, 2 months ago, it was one of the smallest classes outside of Michigan for a Power 5 school. And if you can close with 3 elite top 15 guys, that's an elite because I know Dan loves that word.
Yeah.
But with a potential, game-changing franchise-type left tackle in Martez Ivey, C.C. Jefferson's a phenomenal defensive end. Byron Cowart's the number 1 defensive end in the country. That could be a nice way for Florida to get things ramped up down the stretch. And then, of course, it's going to be what's Kyler Murray officially going to do. I know he kind of set Twitter on fire last week when he tweeted a picture of a Texas jersey. He's been committed to Texas A&M for a long time. It does sound like he's going to stick with Texas A&M, but there's still a week for there to be, even more just, I think, consternation and just panic from Texas A&M fans, as well as hope for Texas fans. So I think because he's kind of become a legend in Texas schoolboy annals, I think there's still the thought that Texas could flip him. But those are really the 2 big storylines. If Florida can close with the big 3, and if Texas can somehow flip Kyler Murray.
Kyler Murray, currently your 4th-ranked quarterback, currently committed to Texas A&M. They love to pass in College Station, but he is just 5'10", 178 as listed on Scout.com, which I believe would make him the Tyron Lannister of this quarterback class. everybody still seems pretty confident that those skills will translate to the next level. Even your colleague, Jamie Newberg, mentioned him as a guy who one day could be on some Heisman boards. Why is there such confidence in a guy like Kyler Murray, who may have a ton of talent, but still is pretty woefully undersized for the position?
Well, you know how it is. If one guy did it at the same size, at the same school, then everybody at the same size and at that same school is going to do it again. And obviously Johnny Manziel was a little undersized when he was at Texas A&M, and his free-flowing nature led him to a Heisman Trophy. And Kyler Murray is just more naturally gifted coming out of high school than Manziel was. And I think that the success that he had at Allen High School, winning 3 state championships, never losing a game at the highest level of football in Texas, kind of gives more credence to what he's capable of doing. But like you said, there's the size concern. There's also the fact that Kyle Allen started to play pretty well down the stretch at Texas A&M. So there's no certainty that Kyler Murray is going to come in and even win the starting job, which I think the lack of any kind of excitement in Texas's offense is kind of given a little bit more fire to the smoke that he was interested in Texas, because they need a major jolt in that offense. So I think with Murray, because he's just been so gifted playing at a high level as a prep, there's the automatic assumption, well, the last time a sub-6-foot quarterback was in College Station, he won a Heisman Trophy and was one of the most dynamic college quarterbacks ever. So I think there's a feeling that, Kyler Murray will get to do the same, but I think a lot of it's based on the fact that Murray is more talented at the same stage than Manziel ever was and doesn't quite have the off-the-field stuff. Even before Johnny Manziel became Johnny Football, he still had some off-the-field issues. Murray doesn't really have those, and if there's anything that could derail it, it's the fact he's still a pretty good baseball player too, and so there's the potential for a draft, being drafted in the spring. But I think with Murray, there's at least a background and a history as a high school player to show that playing on a big stage against big time talent isn't tough for him.
So while we're on the topic of quarterbacks, I must ask, did you watch the Elite 11 special on ESPN?
I did. I was down in Portland or in Beaverton for the entire week back in the summer. And so, you get to see just them on the field when you're down there covering the Elite 11. You just see the workouts. What intrigues me about the actual show is the fact that there's so much more time spent in the classroom, in the film room, and in kind of the extracurricular stuff that they do. So you get to see more of the personality stuff that Trent Dilfer talks about. I read the book, The Quarterback by Bruce Feldman, and there's a lot of talk about what Dilfer wants from these quarterbacks aside from how they actually throw the ball. It's, the mental side of things. So the show, you got to see a lot more of that, which we weren't privy to when we were down in Beaverton. And it's, it's definitely an interesting show. There's definitely some folks that think maybe it's being done a lot differently than it used to be, when it really was just about the throwing, and now it seems it's more about the mental side and that side of things rather than the actual physical side.
Does the intensity really ooze from Trent Dilfer like the slime in Ghostbusters 2, or is that just a made-for-TV thing?
Oh, no. I mean, I've seen him at Nike camps, at Elite 11 regional camps when there were no cameras on, and he's just as intense, maybe even more intense because there aren't any cameras on. I mean, there's a guy who snapped his hamstring at a camp during the spring just because he was so fired up about a drill that he started running and ended up coming up lame. So, you see that intensity and you see it on display. And, there's some guys that respond really well to it. There's some guys that kind of like the tough love. And then there's others that they do tend to cower when he gets after them. And then there's some like Josh Rosen who just kind of roll their eyes and whatever. They don't want to necessarily hear it from Dilfer. And I think the intensity that he shows on television is probably a little bit more candid, because in person, he's even more intense.
So you mentioned Josh Rosen. He's a UCLA commit. He's your number one quarterback over at scout.com. In the Elite 11 final rankings, though, they had him 11th, dead last. In the special, they painted him as almost a tortured genius. Like, he could be a better quarterback if he really put his mind to it, but maybe he really wants to invent cold fusion or do something a little more intellectual. Is that accurate? What is your read on this kid?
Oh, it's absolutely accurate. I mean, here's a kid of 2 Ivy League graduates. His dad's is a doctor. I actually first saw Josh when he was in 8th grade. He came to a 7-on-7 tournament and was playing as an 8th grader. And when I met him there, his coach was Bryce Treggs, who's at Cal's now, his dad, and was a big reason why he went to St. John Bosco, introduced me to him, and I walked away feeling dumber than a 13-year-old because he carried himself so much better, was just a really sharp kid until you watch him over these 3 or 4 years in high school. You realize how intelligent he is, and he doesn't really have time for a lot of catchphrases and cliches and a lot of verbiage that quarterback coaches tend to use. The guy just wants to study and do his schoolwork and play football. He doesn't have time for all the peripheral stuff. And so, there was a lot of talk about that coming out of Beaverton this year, that, he didn't really buy in, and that was one of the big words that Trent Dilfer used with him is, he's got to buy in. And Dilfer's whole thing is he wants to see those guys that, quote-unquote, are dudes, the dudes that buy in, the dudes that are all about the belief and the catchphrases. And Rosen just rolls his eyes, and he's like, I'm going to go play football. I'm smarter than everybody here. The plays that you guys are calling they won't work because you guys aren't thinking about this, this, and this. And he's almost to the point where it's the pupils smarter than the professor, and the professor gets a little frustrated because the pupils calling out the little chinks in the armor there and saying, hey, you know what, you're kind of wrong on this. I'm 25 years younger than you, but I'm smarter than you in a lot of this. So I think that's where you had two very strong personalities kind of butting heads. But if anybody would watch that week, outside of Blake Barnett, who had a great week, especially in the 7-on-7 tournament, it was clear that the most talented quarterback there was Josh Rosen. It's just the mental side and the rah-rah side was lacking compared to some others, and that's what was kind of being looked at a little bit more to be higher ranked in those Elite 11 rankings.
Is he coachable? Because if you don't know Josh Rosen, and if you hear something like this, you might think the kid's a jerk.
If you would have asked me that a year ago, I would have said, you know what, I hope so, because he's so talented that there were some questions when he was a sophomore and as a junior. When he was a junior, he led St. John Bosco to a state championship, but that was a team that was heavy on excellent seniors. I think 5 of the seniors that were on that state championship team either played or started as true freshmen this year in the Pac-12. So there was a lot of talent there, and he kind of got away with the things that he wasn't going to get away with later when that talent wasn't there. And so you saw at times when he would get frustrated, the body language wasn't quite what you'd want it to be. Well, in the off-season last spring, you really saw the maturity really start to come as a player. He was already a pretty smart kid, a mature individual, but as a player, he did tend to have some moments where it was he looked aggrieved about everything. I saw him just become a completely different person, more of a team guy during the spring and in the summer, and it carried over into his senior year where they lost a lot of talent, and he still almost single-handedly won another section title with them, with a group of receivers that were dropping 7 to 8 passes a game, and I think he just became more of a leader this season. So he's now going into a situation at UCLA where you've got a pretty strong personality at head coach in Jim Moore and a pretty strong personality as an offensive coordinator in Noel Mazzoni. So if he's not coachable, things could combust because things have set up for him to make the transition a little bit more seamless with 10 returning starters. But if he's coming in with kind of what Jeff Driscoll came in with to Florida, where the inability to be coached and the easily visible frustration, it could get ugly at UCLA because he's the most talented quarterback in the school, but there's a couple of other guys that maybe will take to coaching a little better.
One other question about a different quarterback, Brandon Wimbush, dual threat guy. I've read a lot of banter about how he's the perfect fit for Brian Kelly's system at Notre Dame. And he could be that fit, but it's a really crowded quarterback situation in South Bend. He's not playing in 2015. He's probably not playing in 2016. Do you think he's willing to wait until 2017 to duke it out with Deshaun Kaiser? Or is he the next Gunnar Kiel who's going to commit and then transfer out?
No, and I think part of that's because he was committed to Penn State, and it looked like he was headed there, and there was probably a better chance for him to be a starter sooner rather than later at Penn State because there was a good chance that Christian Hackenberg were to leave. Well, now he goes to Notre Dame, kind of knowing what the traffic jam at quarterback looks like, and then decides that he still wants to be a part of that. And his commitment and kind of him going to Notre Dame kind of affected Notre Dame's recruitment of a quarterback for the future because they were the pretty much heavy favorite to get Malik Henry in the 2016 class. He decides to go to Florida State because I think he was aware just how talented that Brandon Wimbush is. And I got a chance to see Wimbush back in March. He came out to Las Vegas for the Pylon 7-on-7 tournament, and you got to see just a very gifted quarterback. Then I saw him at the Elite 11, and it was like seeing a completely different person because in 7-on-7, you don't necessarily get to see the way these quarterbacks move. They just take a snap in the shotgun, they drop back, they try to throw the ball. Here you get to see a little bit more of the technical side of things, the footwork and all that, in the drills that kind of show exactly what you're looking for in a quarterback. But his arm strength, I mean, top 2 arm at that event, probably with Josh Rosen, and really impressed me. And he ended up moving up the rankings pretty big because you just started to see all those raw tools that he had coming together. And I think it's going to serve him well to sit a year or two because he's got all the physical tools. And I think it's a matter of just continuing to get better at the position and putting all those tools together. But in terms of what he's bringing to the table physically, this is a kid who I think understands he's going to have to wait, and that's why he was willing to make the decision to commit to Notre Dame. But now you're going to get to see him be brought along a little slower and get thrust into action right away, maybe before he's ready.
You mentioned Penn State. They're 9th in your rankings currently. James Franklin entered his new position, pledging to dominate the state of Pennsylvania, and thus far, he's done really well. He's flipped a lot of guys into coming to State College. Are there any more surprises in store for James Franklin and Penn State?
Well, I mean, getting Sharif Miller last week was kind of a big surprise. There were a lot of people that thought he was headed to Arizona State. I think for them, the big thing has just been holding on to the majority of guys. They did lose a couple guys, obviously losing Wimbush hurt, but they were able to really hold on to a lot of early commitments. And, they had, I think, 4 or 5 commitments before the end of February last year and did a really good job of getting early commitments. And the irony there is that Joe Paterno was really the first guy to have the early commitments and the verbal commitments. And I think when Franklin comes in there and he had a full year to recruit guys, he kind of knew the type of caliber player he was looking for, and he got after those guys very early on. So their class was really strong on the front end. And then I think because they did such a good job getting guys early and getting a good number of guys early, it became more just a matter of maintenance down the stretch of just, finding the guys that you're still in the mix for, really focusing on that guy. I mean, when you look at Penn State's class compared to the other top 15 classes, there's still a lot of top 15 classes that their class could get better, it could get worse because there's still 7, 8, 9 targets. I think right now it's more about maintenance for Penn State, just holding on to the guys that you were able to bring in. They brought in a few of those guys, I think, in the early graduation. So I think that's what's helped with them is keeping those guys and getting them on campus quicker. Let's
head south. Let's talk about Tennessee because your number one prospect right now headed to Tennessee, Khalil McKenzie, 6'3.5", 341. He's a defensive tackle who can clearly help Tennessee along that line almost immediately. They've also added Shai Tuttle along the interior line and Kyle Phillips at defensive end. Was there a concerted effort that you noticed by Butch Jones to beef up the lines because they were such a weakness this past season?
There's no question. And it doesn't hurt that with Khalil McKenzie, the number one player in the country, that he's a Tennessee legacy. I mean, here's a kid who spent his first couple years playing football in Wisconsin when his dad was the assistant GM of the Packers and then moved to the Bay Area when his dad took over the general manager job with the Raiders. But here's a kid who grew up wanting to play at Tennessee, so they didn't really have to worry about any of the southern schools going after this kid because he's on the West Coast, but they were able to get a legacy to come and follow them. Well, when that legacy happens to be the number one player in the country, that's big. Well, the natural product, and we saw this with Ole Miss a couple of years ago when they were leading heavily for Robert Nkemdiche, how many other top-tier players want to play with a top-level guy, with the number one guy? And then Ole Miss's class ends up being very strong because guys wanted to play with Nkemdiche. With McKenzie committing in July when he did, a lot of other guys down the stretch really wanted to join him. And so, like you said, they got Shai Tuttle. They've got Kyle Phillips, who was phenomenal at the U.S. Army Bowl, just missed being a 5-star. And then, some of the guys that they got a commitment today in Corte Sapp from Milton High School. Then one of the guys that I really like is Sharon Jones, who had been a long-time commit to Florida, comes from the same high school that Tyron Smith and Ronald Powell had gone to at Rancho Verde in Southern California, had been committed to Florida. The coaching change happened. Sharon Jones decided to open things up, ends up going to Tennessee. And speaking of another guy, a lot like Brandon Wimbush, his best football is still going to be ahead of him. So you bring a guy in at quarterback that's going to help you and give you some more depth there. But the key here clearly was on defense and really on the line between Phillips and Tuttle and Khalil McKenzie, and then at linebacker, getting a guy like Darren Kirkland, who was fantastic at the U.S. Army Bowl as well. They really shored up the defensive side of the ball with some key kids that they were able to get a lot of commitments early and then hold on to those guys as well. But Butch Jones has done a phenomenal job with this class.
As I look through your top 25, at least the top 10, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee are your top 3, followed by Florida State, Ohio State, USC, then Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Penn State, and Auburn. I can't look at that list and say to myself that there are any surprises in that top 10, but are there schools maybe beyond 10 that have surprised you with how well they've done out on the trail this year, or by how poorly some schools may have done because they're not in the top 10 or top 15?
Well, yeah, clearly poorly, I mean, when you talk poorly, you have to look at the two big schools that made coaching changes, Michigan and Florida. Now, I think Florida is going to close well, but it's no guarantee that Michigan's going to close well. I think when Harbaugh took over, they only had 6 commitments, and they had lost, I think, 7 or 8 commitments that were committed to Michigan at one point. Those guys opened it up. They still could end up getting number 1 tight end Chris Clark, who had been a Michigan commit, but Michigan's probably the surprise in that you're used to seeing Michigan in the top 25, but given all the turmoil there with Brady Hoke, it's not too much of a surprise. I think probably the bigger surprise, if you look at the top 15, and it makes sense given the fact that they're both coming off very good seasons, but Mississippi State and Ole Miss, I mean, a lot of people thought Ole Miss was just a one-year flash in the pan. They kind of came back to earth a little bit in the 2014 class, but there they are again back in the top 20, and they could close with 3 or 4 key guys down the stretch too to move that ranking up. But Mississippi State, I mean, they've prided themselves in years past on getting maybe the second-tier guys and just developing those guys and making them into better players. They have a top 15 class. And then Michigan State, another school a lot like Mississippi State, who's prided themselves on the development of the underrated guys, the 2 and 3 stars, that they've turned into 4 and 5-star caliber players. Michigan State's got a top 20 class right now. And then probably the one that surprises me the most is Washington. And it's not because I don't think Washington can recruit well. They certainly did under Steve Sarkisian. I think it's answering a lot of the questions fans had. Could Chris Peterson recruit at Washington as well as he did at Boise State when they were the alpha dog of the Mountain West, to now having to go against the Oregon and the Stanfords in your own division and then still have to go against SC and UCLA and Arizona State in your conference?
When you talk about a guy like a Jim Harbaugh, he's obviously headed to Ann Arbor with much fanfare. What is he selling to young recruits? Is he selling them on the NFL? Is he selling them on the tradition of Michigan? As you talk to some of these kids and their parents, what is the general feel for how Harbaugh is trying to lure people to come to Ann Arbor?
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things. One, it is the tradition and history of Michigan, and there's no better salesman for a university than an alum. Now, we've seen a lot of cases where an alum was the head coach, and it just could not have ended worse than it did because they may have gotten the job in the first place because they were an alum. But then when you have a coach who's got the coaching chops like Harbaugh does, and he's had the success in college, he had the success in the NFL, you can buy into it because he's at least had a track record of showing that he's a good coach. Then you take a guy who, when he's selling you Michigan, it's not just some lip service. This is a guy who played there. He went to school there. He knows Michigan. He knows the whole fabric of being a Michigan man. He knows all of that. What he's telling you and what he's selling you is very genuine. Then you look at his track record of the players he brought to Stanford and how well those guys did, not just at Stanford, but how well those guys have made the jump to the NFL. I mean, when you have a tight end like Chris Clark, who's the number 1 tight end in the country, all you have to do is start pointing out Kobe Fleener and Zach Ertz and Levine Toililo, and you start looking at the track record he has at tight end. But then you can also talk about the offensive lineman that he produced at Stanford, the Jonathan Martin, the David DeCastros, probably one of the best young quarterbacks to come out in the last 25 years. Andrew Luck, a Jim Harbaugh product. So he's got a track record of proving that, A, he's a good coach, he's a good recruiter, he's a good developer, and then throw in the fact that there's probably nobody out there who loves Michigan, even though that there was those times of hostility when he was at Stanford and the war of words he got into with Lloyd Carr or whoever it may have been. You know, he had that love for his alma mater. And I think that what people are wondering is, were they going to get a bump in the 2015 class? Probably not. He was hired too late to really get that. But what we've seen from Harbaugh in the last couple of weeks is his willingness to go toe-to-toe with anybody, and more importantly, his aggressiveness in already throwing out offers to the 2016 class, because that's the class that's going to be the most receptive to him, because they've got a full year until they make their decision. So Harbaugh's going in, he's selling tradition, he's selling the history, he's selling his own ability to coach and develop, and his own eye, plus the academics of Michigan, and that makes for a pretty tough thing to go up against. So it's going to be fun to watch him and Urban Meyer kind of recruit against each other for the next few years.
Who are the best recruiters in college football from a head coaching perspective?
I think there's no question that Nick Saban is still the best, but he's getting a lot of competition from Urban Meyer. I think that what Urban's been able to do is pretty remarkable, because he's now at the point as a coach at Ohio State where, much like Nick Saban, he's just picking and choosing what he wants rather than really having to recruit. So I think those two guys are just completely on another level. But then you get to kind of the next tier of good recruiting head coaches, guys like Butch Jones, Jim Morris, Steve Sarkisian, off the top of my head. Bob Stoops has always been one of the better recruiters in college football, and he's had the track record to show it. while he's at Oklahoma. Jimbo Fisher as well. Les Miles is, sitting on an absolute gold mine in that he doesn't really have to deal with any other big-time universities in the state of Louisiana, and there's great talent in state, but he can get into Texas if he needs to. So I think, it's really the Mount Rushmore has two guys on it with Meyer and Saban, and then you have a bunch of really good recruiters that, given the situations, given where they're at, can all be considered pretty good head coaching recruiters. And then you have some coaches that are all about the X's and O's and could care less about recruiting, but they make sure to hire very good assistants to do all that work.
Right. All right. So a couple more here before we wrap it up with Brandon Huffman from Scout.com. We've got a lot of folks listening at home who I would suspect are a lot like me. They follow recruiting a couple weeks out of the year. It's not that we don't care, Brandon. We care about recruiting, but there's just so much going on the field that it's tough to pay attention to what's going on off the field. If you're one of those folks at home, you're probably wondering, give me some names. Give me some things to watch for on signing day. What are some things we can give these people to at least make it a little bit more interesting and at least give them some drama to watch for?
Well, I think you always have to worry about, who's going to bring out the live animal? What's
that's
this year's
right.
live animal going to be? You can never, George Brown brought a mini gator. You had a kid at the Army Bowl who pulled out a stuffed bulldog, which will be nothing compared to when Isaiah Crowell actually pulled a real live bulldog.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So we got to see what animal becomes kind of the cheek pick this year to pull out. There's always that. There's going to be, my favorite phrase when it comes to signing day, and when I say my favorite phrase, it's probably the most obnoxious phrase, is we didn't want him anyway. That's the rallying cry of a fan base when they lose a guy that they have been, probably their fans have been tweeting at the kid for the last year or two. Their coaches have been spending sleepless nights trying to get this kid, and then he picks a rival or another school. Well, we didn't want him anyway. Our 78th ranked quarterback is still better than that number 2 ranked quarterback. And, I trust these coaches. But
of course.
You always have to kind of pay attention to, who are those last-minute flips and sleepers that, nobody knows about that end up becoming big names. And I think you see, it's clear with a guy like Russell Wilson. There's some schools that do a good job of finding guys that are under the radar that maybe are a little bit undersized, but they've done a good job of developing those players. And you look at some of those schools and kind of pay attention maybe to the number 26 through the 40 rankings. Who are those schools in there, and who are some of those guys that have the chops, but maybe they didn't have the measurables, because those might be the guys you end up hearing about when it gets closer to the Super Bowl. I think that the real names, to keep an eye on, you got Sotanye Jamabo, also known as Soso Jamabo.
Yep.
He's the number 1 running back in the country who at one point was either going to Notre Dame or UCLA, but Texas is making a big push to get him. Martez Ivey, who is one of the best offensive linemen to come out in the high school ranks in the last couple of years, out of Florida. You've got Byron Cowart from Florida as well, who's going to probably be deciding between Auburn and Florida. Iman Biggie Marshall from the vaunted Long Beach Poly program, probably the best corner that I've seen on the West Coast, at least in the last 10, 15 years. Daylon Mack, who's been committed to Texas A&M, looked like he was going to commit to TCU. Texas is trying to get him. I think the one name you may hear a lot of on signing day is Charlie Strong. And that's because Texas has a chance to flip a few guys and land a couple more in-state kids that would really give them momentum. And I think Texas fans are still trying to figure out what this getting commitments close to signing day thing is, because under Mac Brown, they usually had their class wrapped up in March. Now they're having to stretch it out and wait a little longer and actually see what signing day drama is like.
It's an arms race. Everyone's trying to outdo one another when it comes to announcing what school they'll be attending. What would it take to bring one on the podcast to do it?
I bet you could get, 1 or 2 guys that are willing to do it. Maybe they're in a little bit more of a remote place where, ESPN or Fox doesn't want to necessarily drive to their school to get their announcement. But I think there's enough guys that still want the attention of audiences to hear where they're announcing. I could see, you guys being able to make a thing out of it, where you do it on signing day, and then he releases it to the world. And hey, if you get him for a kid who's considering the right schools and the right fan bases, you might see even bigger audience, because they're all going to be tuning in to hear the magic words that kid's going to say. And I thank you, LeBron James, for screwing up every announcement in the world for the last 5 years. But I'm taking my talents to the university of a school that's actually the university said after the school name.
We can get a 2-star recruit from Maine to come on the show. We can give you the scoop, Brandon. This could work.
I would take it.
This could work.
I would take it.
All right. 2 final questions here. I ask you this every time you're on the program. The most ridiculous story you've encountered on the recruiting trail this past recruiting season?
they sometimes start to take a life on of their own.
Yeah.
There's one that I heard of a kid who is a top 50 player in the country, that is, and he's currently committed to an SEC school, and there's a couple other Big 12 schools, Pac-12 schools that are trying to flip this kid, and I've heard that because of his legal guardian, who he really hasn't lived with, he's been mostly with his family, but his guardianship was turned over to this person early enough in life where now all of a sudden this guardian's taking an active role. He's trying to keep this kid at the school he's committed to because his biological son is trying to get into school and be a full scholarship ball boy. Now, I don't know how true that is, but now I'm hearing that ball boys are getting full scholarships. I understand that Florida State and Oregon both had high-profile ball boys, but this might be the first time that I've ever heard a ball boy could be the key to keeping a kid and a school not losing a kid. I thought I've heard it all before this, but a ball boy is kind of a new take on things.
You could be drafted by the Patriots.
Very nice. Or I went to college at USC during Lane Kiffin's time.
That's right. There's a long storied past of ball boys in college and pro. Final point here. I got to bring this up because last time we spoke with you, the Scout website looked very different than it does now. It's been updated. It's a lot better than it used to be. You've now got a filtering system, which kind of makes it feel like an NCAA video game. You could find almost anybody based on height, on weight, on position, you name it. Is the business around recruiting getting larger, or are the people doing it just getting louder? Because I can't tell if it's a growing business or if the people who are in the business are just getting better at communicating.
I think it's a little bit of all of that. I do think that there's way more voices than there used to be. I mean, when I first started covering recruiting for Scout, it was in 2003. You could call a kid, and then you wouldn't have to call him for a month because, there weren't a lot of offers being sent out during that time. The evaluation periods, the contact periods were different, and recruiting was so much slower back then where you could call a kid and then call him in a month, and really only one other person had talked to him in that time span, whereas now you have 4 networks, and then you have 4 team sites that maybe cover that kid, and now local newspapers are employing either full-time beat writers to cover just recruiting or full-time the beat writer has something to do in the off-season now that there's no season to cover. And so a kid could get an offer, he could commit to a school, and he could face anywhere between 8 to 12 interviews that people that want to talk to him for all the various networks. And that doesn't even count independent bloggers. It doesn't count up-and-coming kids who are just trying to make a name for themselves by starting their own blog spot, blog and covering recruiting. So I think the space is definitely more full than it's ever been, but I also think that, there's some that are still going to stand kind of the test of time because they have the resources to adjust and to develop better technology, to develop a better site, to develop a better look, to utilize other resources on the technology side, whether it's more podcasts, whether it's more video, whether it's an active presence at All-American games or showcase events. I just think that, recruiting has changed. The recruiting coverage has changed so much, but I think it's also a byproduct of recruiting in general changing so much, whereas you used to have to wait till a kid's senior year to find out who the prospect is. Now kids are getting offers before they even step foot on a high school campus, and there's just more guys to cover now.
Do you think that makes it harder for you as someone who covers it because the bar is continually being raised, or is it one of those deals where it's actually a little bit easier to cover now because it seems like there are more resources being poured into this?
Yeah, again, it's kind of both of those. I mean, there are more resources. Twitter has been a blessing to the recruiting industry. It's also been a curse to the recruiting industry. You now have people that are tweeting at kids and spending their entire time bothering a kid, telling him to, to wear orange or to wear blue, and they're getting all these direct messages and app mentions to them to go to this school, and then those guys don't want to do interviews anymore. They're tired of the process. Right. At the same time, where it used to be kind of a race to see who was going to get the kid on the phone after an official visit on a Sunday, now they're basically live tweeting their entire official visit and including pictures. They're taking pictures with the uniforms. They're taking pictures of the chocolate chip cakes that are sitting at their hotel room. They're taking pictures of the lobster that they're about to eat. And you basically get, they're shouting out their host on the visit. You don't have to call a kid. You can just do a storyfy of their entire trip based on Twitter and Instagram. So you're almost more aware of these kids now when they're visits or when they're getting offers or when they're narrowing their list to a top 5. So it's helped in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's hurt in a lot of ways because they do get tired of the process because there's more and more people pulling them different directions.
Unbelievable. National Signing Day Next week, his name is Brandon Huffman. Find him on Twitter at Brandon Huffman with a U. He is the National Director of Recruiting and a college football analyst for Scout.com. Do check out their website again, Scout.com. Brandon, do your best to stay rested, stay hydrated, stay well-fed over the next couple days. We will absolutely be tuned into your coverage.
I fully intend to do all of those things, especially the sleep and hydration.
All right, take care.
Thanks a lot, Ty.
All right, again, that is Brandon Huffman. You can find his fine work over on Scout.com. He's going to be a very busy man over the next week or so. I'd say if you're into recruiting, though, you do owe it to yourself to check him out. So with all that said, as I said at the top of the show, Dan is not here today. Because of that,
Congratulations, Skippy. You've got mail.
You've got mail on the Solid Verbal.
because of that, folks, we got time to fill. We got all sorts of time to fill. I figured we haven't had Mama H on the program in quite some time. There's no time like the present. Mama H, welcome back in front of the microphone.
Thank you for having me back, Ty.
So here's what I did. I solicited a slew of questions on our Facebook page, facebook.com/solidverbal. One of our favorites, Patrick and Warner, both wrote in wanting to know about my most embarrassing story as a child. So for the record, this has not been pre-rehearsed at all. This is happening in real time.
Right.
So, okay. Embarrassing stories as a child. I have a hunch I know where you're going to go with this one first.
Well, probably really truthfully, the most embarrassing one was the movie theater stint when we went to see a Big Bird movie. Remember that Big Bird movie?
Yeah, okay.
And Big Bird.
How old was I? I was like 22, wasn't I?
You must have been about, I would say, 5 years old. And anyone who knows anything about Sesame Street knows that Big Bird is this big yellow bird. And unfortunately,
By the way, if you are not aware of who Big Bird is, just, hit yourself with a tack hammer at this point. But
but anyway, long story short, there were evil people in the movie. And what they wanted to do was capture Big Bird. And they wanted to turn him blue. Well, all we had to do was look at Tyler, and as soon as Big Bird turned blue, because they threw paint over him, he was sobbing so loud in the theater that probably every mother in the theater turned around. They were going, "Oh, honey, don't cry. It'll be all right." And he said, "Mommy, please make Big Bird yellow."
I can't believe we're telling this on the air.
Well, my sister-in-law and I were just laughing and feeling sorry for you, but needless to say, they did wash Big Bird. They did wash Big Bird off, and he became yellow again. And Ty survived, but it was embarrassing.
It was a defining moment of my childhood.
Only kid in the theater that cried. Oh, and the other story. This is a family one. Sitting around the Italian table, and Ty was a little guy eating spaghetti. And we always had breadsticks and salad. Oh my gosh.
Not the breadstick story.
The breadstick story lives in infamy.
No.
Honestly, we tell it. And he actually has a godson now, little Connor, who also is not a fan of sitting at the table and eating.
This story is going to live on the internet forever now.
And
this is a problem.
Unfortunately, Tyler broke his breadstick while he was eating it, and he insisted that Mommy put it back together. Mommy, and we're telling him, Ty, you can't put it back together. It's broken. Mommy, please, tape it back together. Get Scotch tape and put it back together. Ty, that doesn't work. Get glue and put it back together. Well, by now, the other kids, my brother, my sister-in-law, and his grandmother were all leaving the table, and I was sitting there with a kid who insisted on gluing the breadstick back together. Needless to say, that wouldn't have tasted very good nor been good for his health. That breadstick story follows us to restaurants. It follows us to other people's parties. And now with little con man, who really is not a big fan of some eating experiences, we say he's taking after his godfather.
Taking after the godfather. They already call me the podfather in some circles, so I suppose it's a natural evolution. Another question that we got here, are you a fonduer or a fondonter? Because you remember, I know you listen to the show. We had this debate Dan and I did about Valentine's Day, and does it make sense to get the fondue pot and just do the fondue thing at home? Or does it make sense to try and recreate the original meal. For what it's worth, the guy who asked the question wrote back to us and said that he is going with the fondue idea. So that means to some degree that I won, but I wanted to get your response to this. I already know what it is, by the way, because you called me and demanded we talk about it for about a half hour while I was at work on the clock. But do you want to summarize your thoughts on this?
Yeah, basically, I agree with the fondue idea. I think both ideas were actually great ideas. But, Dan had talked about investing the money in the fondue thing. Well, you know what? You could use that over and over again. And depending on what kind of meal it was and where you were with this person the first time you met them, the fondue could actually be a cheaper way to go than because this gentleman that asked the question was kind of like on a budget. I don't know. I think the fondue was a great idea. You've already treated me to a really special meal at a place where it was all fondue, and it was pretty cool. So I like that idea.
All right, we got another one here asking Urban Meyer, your favorite guy, coach of the year. Do you wish he were coaching Notre Dame at this point? Because he's had success now at all of his stops. People know that you're not an Urban Meyer fan, but do you wish now, in hindsight, that he was the coach for the Irish?
I will never wish that Urban Meyer was.
Really?
No. I think he's a great coach. I'll give him that much, but I am not an Urban Meyer fan. I've never been an Urban Meyer fan.
What is your problem with Urban Meyer?
I don't know. I just, when he had the opportunity to go from Utah to Notre Dame, and it looked like he was considering, and then he just kind of like bagged it and kept on going down to Florida because he could recruit anything and anyone. I don't know. I just don't like him.
So you mean to tell me that...
Plus that whole sickness thing. Give me a break.
You're not buying...
Oh my God, I'm so sick. And then he's back coaching.
You're not buying it?
No.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that he, I don't want to say what I'm thinking.
Okay.
It wouldn't be very nice for your
Conspiracy theories here on the Solid Verbal.
No, I don't know. I just didn't buy that. Hey, look, he came back. I mean, how sick was he?
Mama H, we've got a lot of questions here about my bride-to-be. People want to know about fiancé Kate. They want to get your real-time read on fiancé Kate. Do you have a real-time read that you can echo into the microphone here?
She's beautiful. She's kind. She's the girl of my dreams.
Whoa.
If I had to pick someone for my son, I couldn't have done a better
The girl
job.
of your dreams.
The girl of my dreams for my little boy.
This is a weird love triangle, Mom.
Well, you know what?
We've had some weird things on this show.
I know, but I just love the girl.
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad this is working out.
Well, things could go worse. I mean, things have happened with other people,
I know. Final question. While we were out in Dallas, Bruce Feldman had a theory for a sitcom. A theory for a sitcom that involved you being anti-Semitic. What was your response to that? And if Bruce is listening, what would you like him to know?
I thought it was a hilarious suggestion. I did laugh, but there's nothing about me that's anti-Semitic. In fact, sometimes Italian mothers and Jewish mothers kind of seem the same with their kids. So, it did not bother me. I thought it was actually quite funny. And, it takes a lot to insult me.
Okay. Who are you picking in the Super Bowl?
I am picking the Seahawks in the Super Bowl because, I absolutely have an aversion for the Patriots and anything New England.
So you're going with Cheat Carroll.
Oh, come on. After this deflate balls situation, of course I'm going
Patriots.
I know you are. Well, we're going to argue about that.
I'm going Patriots.
I don't want to argue about that.
Thanks again to our guest of honor this evening, Brandon Huffman, for stopping by and talking some recruiting, giving us a primer, telling us what we should expect on Wednesday. Again, it's National Signing Day. It's February 4th. Dan and I will be back in the saddle then. We will do our best to recap all of the action and bring you up to speed on where some of these names that Brandon mentioned are going to be playing their college football. In the meantime, though, enjoy the Super Bowl. It is your last glimpse of real, actual football for the next couple months anyway. You can find us on Facebook, on FanCred, and of course, on Twitter. Don't forget to head on out and vote for the Verbies. And if you are interested in some extra comfortable socks, go to bombas.com Facebook.com/verbal. For myself, Ty Hildenbrand, for my mother, Mama H, and for Dan Rubenstein, who is nowhere to be found, at least not on this coast. Thanks again for tuning into the Solid Verbal. Download the show, tell your friends, enjoy your weekend, and stay solid.